During World War I, battle was ruthless, and many fell to the innumerable German forces. Among the fighters was the British Expeditionary Force, who made their first appearance in the Battle of Mons. Largely outnumbered, they were sure to be defeated until, as legend has it, a phantom army rained from the sky, aiding them in the battle and saving many of their men. Was this a case of hallucination, or did these ghostly visitors save a multitude of lives? Today we're investigating the very interesting Angels of Mons. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the unknown. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing about this really fascinating topic, this very intriguing case for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
I mean, it kind of feel like we're just talking about Return of the King here.
Yeah! Oh, yeah, buddy! The army of the dead, an oath, the oath breakers.
I was like, what do you mean Ghost Army came in and saved them? I've seen this already.
I have a piece in this episode that I was like, I'm going to shoehorn in my Lord of the Rings references right here. You're not wrong. In fact, when researching this particular story, this comes from Christian, who has known about this for a few years. I'll talk more about that in a second. But like, when reading about this, I was like, did Tolkien use any part of the stories here to inspire what happened in Lord of the Rings?
Right.
And I don't think I actually Googled that. So Christian, if you don't mind taking a dive into that to see if there's anything that comes up, we can resurface that as the time comes. But yeah, the Angels of Mons, a very interesting topic because we know everything about it. On a rare occasion, we'll talk about a solved mystery, and I think that's kind of what's happening here, but very much like some of the paranormal episodes we've had before, some of the folklore episodes, some of those kind of interesting gray area episodes, we're going to watch the origins of a ghost story in real time. Because when Christian mentioned doing this and we put it on the docket and we scheduled it and we started doing research, we didn't know that there was actually an understanding of what happened underneath this. We thought that this was some sort of like, maybe it was aliens, maybe it was ghosts, maybe it was something, divine intervention, but we know actually a lot more. But despite that, despite what we do factually know, we get to watch this thing take on a life of its own. And I think for that reason, it's even more interesting than what we first started out to explore. So it is a wild time. And of course, you know, I love a little dabble with history. This is a very interesting case to be sure. But as you're hearing this, aside from Return of the King, does anything else stand out to you? What are you feeling when you hear something like this? It's in the midst of World War I. The British Expeditionary Force makes their debut essentially against the German Empire, which we'll talk about their army sizes, but they were vastly outnumbered. It was tremendous.
I mean, it gives me 300 vibes as well. But then also on top of that, it's just one of those things where, I mean, at least in media and entertainment, you know, there's all these grand stories of, you know, this time period, you know, the German army experimenting with crazy things, whether it be science that has pushing the boundaries of science or mystical type things. And so do I believe that it was that like that? No, it's a movie, right? Or it's a show. But I can see the German army trying to experiment with whatever they can.
I mean, there's a lot of conspiracies around that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of actual conspiracies around it. And so, you know, for this story to be like, you know, I don't know, it just seems like such a fun story, such a grand story. And I'm very intrigued to like learn all the details because, you know, you don't like to usually use the word fun, but this is something that just like piquing my interest, right? Because it seems like this grandiose supernatural story, the German army and everything that they're doing. And then out of nowhere, you know, this insurmountable odds and the supernatural come and assist an army. Like, what does that look like? Does anyone have any like stories? Like, also, if they're assisting an army, then was everyone on board with this?
Right.
Was everyone's like, we all saw it? Or people are just like, I don't know what y'all saw, but I didn't see that. You know what I mean? And they're like, shut up, Dave.
Dave, damn it.
We all agreed to this.
Dave, we all said we saw it.
Right.
Yeah, dude, you're totally right. And I think I get what you're saying. When you say fun, I'm not taking the malicious interpretation. I understand that a lot of these topics are really, really fascinating. There's something drawing about them. And I think now that we've done this for 5.5 years, I think we've identified the deeper layers of intrigue in a lot of these topics. Of course, the stories are all fascinating. The theories, the what ifs, the what could be.
Yes.
All of that is so deeply fascinating. But now you see the undercurrents of like, well, what really motivates something to really get into the zeitgeist? Why is spiritualism such a big thing during the time of the turn of the Victorian era into the 20th century, which is kind of where we're at? Why is what makes that tick, and what stories kind of sparked any of that? So we've explored, like the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, one of the first original ghost pictures. Yes, we debunk it, but at the same time, you explore why it's there. Why are these things so fascinating? Even if it's a true crime case that's unsolved, sometimes, like last week, it's exploring how even in modern times, the truth can be lost in just a simple, short period of time. And so I think that's also part of exploring these is what happens in the zeitgeist to kind of change things or spark intrigue in something else. I don't know. This is going to be a really, really fun exploration, I think, of an otherwise very heavy topic, right? World War I. Also, to clarify something I said earlier, we have the German Empire here in World War I. A lot of conspiracies mostly revolved around the Nazi Germany's experiments and things of World War II. So before we dive in, I do want to say lots happening on Red Web. This Wednesday, we have a poll exclusively for you guys on the elite tier and up. So if you want to kind of come decide our futures, sometimes it's a movie club, sometimes it's which episode are we going to cover or cover first or what have you, or sometimes it's just us kind of scratching at your brains and seeing what makes it tick.
Yep.
And it all goes back into our giant pot of stew as we stir up the old, knowledge juice. That metaphor got away from me. This Friday, we have another gameplay. Every month, we put out a gameplay just for you guys as well. We call it Field Work. It's our way to experiment with things that are too dangerous for us to go touch grass and do. Yeah. So we do it in games.
Yeah. Dude, extra brave in game.
We can be very brave in game. Hard to be brave in real life. All right, let's dive into the Battle of Mons. And Christian, I'm going to hold you with the Tolkien knowledge until later on, but listen, I've got Tolkien all over my shelf. I want to know the answer if he was inspired by this story, but we'll dive into that in a second. So the origins of the Angels of Mons, this legend, it dates back to August 23rd, 1914. And on this day, the British Army had its first involvement in World War I. This was the Battle of Mons, and this battle was one of a series of battles. I'm going to do a lot of history truncation, but if you find this interesting, there is a lot to explore. This was one of the many battles that kind of was called the Battle of the Frontiers. If you like history, go read about it. It is so fascinating. And obviously, we are on the precipice of the Great War, the war to end all wars. We know now with history, it wasn't the case, but that's the energy, that's the palpable energy we're talking about as we step into this fray. And the British deployed what they called their British Expeditionary Force. I'll call them the BEF, which was comprised of a small British army. And in total, it had 6 infantry divisions. And in this battle, they had one of their total 5 cavalry brigades. The BEF also had a very small army. So to give you an idea, estimates range, but let's just average it out to about 80,000 people on the BEF.
Okay.
Whereas the German Empire itself, as well as the French, both huge armies, each numbering near 1 million troops.
Jeez, that's insurmountable. Oh, my goodness.
Right. So we'll talk about this battle in particular. I don't think all of the troops are all coming out all at once.
Right, yeah.
But suffice to say, we have insurmountable odds for sure. As such, the German troops, as you can imagine, seemed innumerable, majorly outnumbering the BEF and leaving them, of course, extremely vulnerable. Now, they met with their enemies head-on in the Belgian town of Mons. This is about 35 miles or 56 kilometers south of Brussels. And it's only just now dawning on me how many of our episodes actually seem, at least recently, to be in Belgium.
Yeah, yep.
Belgium's got anything from the wave of UFO sightings to serial killers to criminals and heists happening, and now what seems to be a paranormal event on the battlefield.
Well, we talk about hotspots,
It's a hot spot in a lot of ways, especially geopolitically. It's just right in the thick. So despite being the underdog, the British, were able to hold off the German Empire army throughout this day. Now, it's reported, again, estimates, that the German army suffered anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 casualties, while the British suffered approximately 1,600. The original account of army men is kind of unclear, but all that is to say is the British, despite the overwhelming odds, actually came out on top. So one might consider this to be a technical win for the British, having held off a larger army, but also a strategical win for Germany because eventually they kind of pushed in on the front and gained territory. So you can kind of see it both ways depending on your lens. Now, because of this, right, the Germans losing more than the British, the day goes on and the Germans continue to deploy more troops into the fight because they have, I guess, the head count essentially. But when it became clear that their odds were turning, now talking about the British, General Sir John French ordered his men to retreat. And even as they were retreating, there is documentation, he has written about this himself, the men continued to fight hard. In later memoirs, actually, General French notes that the men seemed to embody what he called a superhuman endurance. And this is where my ridiculous comparison was going to come in, but you already cracked in the Return of the King. I was going a little different. I was like, this small army going up against a greater army reminds me, of the army of the West marching on the black gates of Mordor. You got 6,000 men facing the full force of Sauron's army of like 80,000 or something like that.
God, we're such nerds. I love it. I love it, dude. I love it.
But it feels so similar.
It does. It does feel similar.
It's the same scale.
It is. It is. It really is.
So, I mean, if you've seen those movies, now picture that. 6,000 to 80,000. We're talking over here 80,000 to 1,000,000. So it's like 10 times that scale, but still proportionately, oh my God.
Look, I mean, it just gives me a good visual. How do you even have any bravery in you?
Right.
Right. At that point, you just got to go, I will cease to exist in this plane of existence after these moments. These are my final moments. And I guess from that point, it's just, how do I last want to be remembered? Or how, you know what I mean? And so you just muster up the courage, I guess, at that point,
right.
It kind of gets to a point where just like, it's the end and just go out swinging.
Yes, it's a bit ridiculous, but you look at the Lord of the Rings kind of metaphor and you can kind of understand the bravery and superhuman endurance necessary because you're in the thick of it. Your colleagues, you might have lost some close members, like friends also in the army. You're fighting for your life. You're fighting for a huge and greater cause. And you're right. There's nothing to do but to do it. You are in it now. So fight your butt off kind of thing. And
very much.
So yeah, the general is kind of commenting on that. And so I think that's important to know. So you, one, have a crash course on what that battle is, what we're about to talk about. And two, because I really wanted to convey as best I could the energy of the time, the thinking, what's going on with World War I cracking open, but also the inordinate odds, the retreat, and how these soldiers are feeling. Because all of this, I think, motivates the concoction that sparks a legend. Sparks this folklore that will last till now even.
That's a good point.
So here we are now, just a month after the Battle of Mons, and I'm going to give you straight up what we understand, what we know factually, rather than baiting you into the idea of what's real, what's not. So here's the story. On September 29th, 1914, a Welsh author named Arthur Machen published a short story titled The Bowman in the Evening News, which was a London newspaper at the time. He set his story during a retreat from the Battle of Mons. So a very specific choice to pick a very real event. In his work, he wrote that English soldiers called upon St. George for help as they were being attacked. Now, this is where I give you an illustration, an image of what this scene might have looked like based on the description of this story.
Oh.
So I'll let you kind of open that up and you'll see the bowman that I'm talking about, but I'll let you describe the scene you see.
Yeah, so there's a trench that's dug up and there's a bunch of men with rifles shouldered over the trench. Got medics in the back behind that. It's a scene of war, some dead bodies even further back. But then standing tall right in front of the men with rifles are these, they look like spectral entities of bowmen, just all in a line as far as I can see.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Now, look at what they're wearing. I don't know what those hats are called.
Yeah, they look like those safari hats.
Yeah.
Kind of like, the hunter in Jumanji.
Oh, I was just going to say it. Yeah, you were reading my brain. We're making such terrible metaphor comparisons here.
Millennials are like, I get all this.
Yeah. We're a show for millennials and moms. Listen, that's kind of what I'm seeing. We'll describe those outfits a little bit, much more specifically, actually, and where they come from.
This is like old British army helmets, right? Is that what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pretty much right on the head of the nail there. So this is a visual. As like the story unfolds, this is what kind of the visual was made for. Now in life, we're talking about calling down St. George, asking for help in that moment. St. George is a revered Christian martyr known for his bravery as a Roman soldier. And in the Christian faith, St. George is the patron saint of many countries, including England, but also of soldiers, knights, fencers, archers, and much more. So you can see the relevance at hand, retreating soldiers calling down their patron saint, essentially. So again, coming back to Macin's story, as it continues, after he's called upon for help, St. George then appears on a white horse to help them win the battle. He is surrounded by bowmen, but not just any bowmen, as you described them, with their, I want to say, old-timey kind of hats. Specifically in this story, they are bowmen from the 1415 Battle of Agincourt, which was part of the 100 Years' War. My history buffs and European history buffs would know, shout out. Now, the story goes on to say that 10,000 Germans perished with the help of these archers, and the British then went on to win the battle. Obviously, a little bit more of a departure from reality, but not so much as to rattle the believability for people susceptible to it. I'm laying some groundwork. We know that Mackin might have taken some inspiration from the Battle of Mons itself after hearing how well the British held on their own, and maybe pulled from some of that to work on this admittedly work of fiction. But Mackin claims that he didn't notate as such, right? He said the work was entirely crafted in his head, and much like any movie that's ever been made, you see at the end of the credits, like, any resemblance to true people or events or places is all coincidence, right? So that's kind of his claim, is that he's not necessarily imbibing all of this truth into it. He might have been inspired by it. And he's kind of saying that any sort of truths amongst the fiction are just kind of being stumbled into. But this leads us to a very interesting conversation when we talk about the aftermath of this story hitting the world and being published. But that's the story. I want to give a pause for a second. If you have any thoughts or questions before we move into how this story then was broadly accepted and what people responded with it.
No, I mean, I'm interested to see what people think, and I'm still curious as to see, like, do we have people from the army that, are talking about it? Is there any kind of, notes that were taken down, etc.? I mean, yeah, there were some notes. That's why we know some of it. But, is it word of mouth? Who wrote stuff down? All that kind of stuff. Like, what's the tangible aspect to this?
Right. Especially in a time where you don't have cameras so readily available in your pocket. You don't have video of all things, obviously. And so, yeah, a lot of things do rely on word of mouth and believing of facts, which I think is a very interesting cornerstone to this particular topic. But before we get away from it, though, I did kind of gloss over the Black Gate of Mordor metaphor. Christian, were you able to find if there was any inspiration taken from this particular story?
I hate to disappoint. From what I can see, there's no explicit confirmation that Tolkien was inspired by this story in particular, but there have been a number of people making the connection and the similarity of themes, and there are people saying that he might have been inspired by it, but nothing concrete.
Gotcha. I mean, it would not surprise me. I know some battles in particular definitely motivated his description of death and helped him paint a very vivid world. I mean, he was a World War I soldier. He fought in World War I. So whether it's this battle or another or the greater war at hand, obviously it played a large part in his experience. So, but it is funny that you mentioned it because that was definitely on my mind. Okay, so now thinking about some of your instincts, your questions, those will play out interestingly here in the aftermath. So after the story was published, it instantly became popular. So much so that in the months after its publication, many people called into the newspaper to request reprints of the story. Like, hey, I've heard about it. I didn't get that copy. Print it again. I want it. I want to read it. Mackin then decided, I would say wisely, to publish a novel entitled The Bowmen and Other Legends of the War. This was in 1915. So, I mean, it is his story. You might as well collect that and a bunch of other stories and sell it if you are getting some wind in your sails. But doing this reprinting, I should say, he expanded on other supernatural legends that were spoken of during the time. And those are kind of neither here nor there, but maybe add a little bit more to the story at hand. So in the introduction of the novel, Mackin details that he was approached by a priest who wanted permission to reprint the story, but instead into a pamphlet format. Now, in order to do that, the priest requested sources that Mackin used in order to write the story. However, again, Mackin was unable to complete this request because he was like, well, this is all just kind of off my mind. This is all like from an invention of my creativity. The story is fictitious, not real, even if some events feel real or ended up being real. In fact, in the introduction of his 1915 novel, Mackin wrote this, quote, "It seemed that my light fiction had been accepted by the congregation of this particular church as the solidest of facts, and it was then that it began to dawn on me that I had failed in the art of letters. And it was then that it began to dawn on me that if I had failed in the art of letters, I had succeeded unwittingly in the art of deceit. This happened, I should think, sometime in April, and the snowball of rumor that was then set rolling has been rolling ever since, growing bigger and bigger, till it is now swollen to a monstrous size." End quote. A beautiful way to say that it got out of hand quick. But I appreciate that this is in the novel. He's like, it's not real.
I like that. It's like a peek behind a curtain. It's the admission of like failure and everything like that. And it's cool. It's like you want to hear these deep things.
Right. You know, especially when you're like, well, I set out to do this, but I ended up doing this.
Yeah.
So I'm addressing it, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate that you like my story, but it's fictitious. So around this time, stories began to emerge, almost kind of like as if something sparked them, of soldiers claiming to have seen St. George on the battlefield that day, or knowing of someone who did. So suddenly, you know, the timeline shows Mackin's story hits the newspapers, gets republished, and then in 1915 becomes a novel with a collection of stories. And somewhere along this timeline, now people are starting to go, yeah, a buddy of mine who fought in that battle saw this. Or rumors are stirring of somebody saying, I saw this. Now others say that they saw a ribbon of shining soldiers coming down between the two armies. This is kind of why you see that line of bowmen going kind of infinitely into the horizon. Now this in particular correlates very well to Mackin's own story, as the soldier in the story saw, quote, a long line of shapes with a shining about them, end quote. So now we're seeing very specific details to the story also appearing in real life. And it's evolving to the point that people are even saying, not only did my buddy see St. George descend from the skies on a white horse, I also saw German soldiers who had been struck down by arrows in the battlefield. And so, again, you're not getting a lot of new, inventive eyewitness accounts, but you're getting a lot of very detailed copies.
Yeah, people just essentially reiterating.
Yeah.
But then again, it's like were a bunch of bodies discovered with arrows then?
That's what I'm wondering.
You know what I mean? Like,
where are these arrows?
Where are these arrows at?
Right.
And then also, if not, then I guess like there would be, I don't know, like wounds of being shot by an arrow? Or was it just like it pierced through the skin and into the, like, how does it, at what point does this paranormal arrow become
corporeal
and then like
physical
physical and actually pierces like an organ, or you know what I mean? Like, is it like, does it go into the skin and it's transparent and then it becomes solid as it like enters the heart? Like, what's the science behind that? I'm thinking in my head.
Right. I would imagine that they'd stay ghost form, you know, the souls of dead arrows everywhere start flying through the air, and then just kind of put invisible holes into everybody, but then those might just be bullet holes, you know? But people are saying they're seeing actual physical arrows on the battlefield. And so to that, I'm saying, right, can I see one? Right? You know what I mean? Someone somewhere has a grandpa who had a grandpa, and this arrow's been passed down like it's the Hobbit. You know what I mean? This is the arrow that will take down Smaug, but I have it above my mantle.
Mm-hmm.
That would be very fascinating. This is said to be an arrow from St. George. That I feel like that has to exist somewhere.
Yeah, it'd have to.
So bless his heart, Mackin goes on for many years throughout his career, reiterating and reiterating again that this story was imaginary, but the notion seemed to be widely ignored. Now that is the part I find so deeply fascinating, because we see the kernel of truth, we see how it blossoms into a tree of rumor and fascination and story and lore that is now almost immediately out of hand, beyond the creator's extent of pulling it back or whatever, you know? So I find it like, why was that? There's a lot of the psychology of war happening here, a lot of the fears. We'll talk about newspapers and the importance of news from the battlefield, kind of as we enter the theories as to why this might have happened. But that's, I think, to me, the nugget of intrigue here. Jumping back into the timeline and some more eyewitness accounts. It's August 1915, and we have a nurse named Phyllis Campbell, and she wrote about her experience helping veterans of the war, and she's working in the Army hospital, right? And around this time, you know, she sees two soldiers who had themselves told her that they had a vision of St. George on his horse. And so again, we have just a few nuggets of truth coming from different angles. This is the most vivid one we have that isn't just he said, she said, kind of the general atmosphere. But interestingly, the difference with these two soldiers is it didn't happen at the Battle of Mons. Instead, it happened 3 weeks after the battle at a location called the Vitry-le-François. The Vitry-le-François is located on the River Marne, where the battle began to move after the Battle of Mons. You know, so like I said, the German Empire is pushing back on the British. They are encroaching, they're making some grounds. And where they're kind of retreating at is where this event happens now 3 weeks later. So not the same battle, but a similar area. These two soldiers now see St. George at a separate time. However, Mackin spoke out against Campbell's writings. This is again the nurse, claiming that no one could prove that they saw St. George. And this again comes back to what you were asking for. Who's got those live memoirs? Because aside from like photography that takes a while to and would be very dangerous to develop in this environment, we don't have anything else to go off of.
Right.
So yes, no one can prove that they saw St. George, but unfortunately, Mackin, you can't prove that they didn't.
Yeah,
you know
yeah, you're right.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, he goes, yeah, but I made it up. And they're like, yeah, right, I understand, but that's the weird thing is like, if someone out of thin air, right? It's the same as like a UFO sighting. If they were to say, I saw a ghost or something, I felt something, or I heard a creature in the woods, or I saw a UFO, that's almost conjured out of thin air. And part of that almost feels like you want to believe it. But in this moment, we have an author saying, I made this story up. And then these things are happening.
Right.
Yet it's still caught on. It's so fascinating.
It's very fascinating how it caught on. He's like, I made it up. And then now everyone's like, no, this is real. I'm like, what do you mean? I am the person that literally made it up. But then from there, it's just like...
And they're like, yeah.
It's like, nah. But also it's like, oh, if they take it and make it their own... Well, also two ways, right? The masses are like, no, it's real. Then that's what's going to, right, catch fire. Yeah. But then also if everyone else is saying like, oh, it's real, then maybe it's like he made it up. I don't think it is that in this case.
You know, the common thing I see whether it's a whistleblower or it's someone who's attempting to blow the whistle and unveil a truth, right? Like the government knows about aliens. Whenever they try to walk it back, or whenever like the soothsayer in this moment, Mackin, the author, tries to claw it back, there's always a portion of people that go, you can't put it back in the bottle. You've unveiled the truth and I have seen it with my eyes. You know, like there is always like that group that it will validate pre-existing desires or beliefs or whatever it is. And so I can understand how it immediately, you know, Pandora's box is opened.
Yeah.
But I said before that the claims weren't really evolving. They were staying pretty true to his original story. And that seemed to be true for the most part until, like I said, around the turn of August, now we have soldiers from weeks later saying they saw something. But then by December, things really start to get out of hand. Soldiers are claiming that they're not only just seeing St. George, but it's evolved now to see multiple angels. Joan of Arc has come back and they're seeing her.
Yeah, let's add her to the roster.
Right. Soldiers are seeing their fallen comrades. The people that they were fighting alongside are now suddenly back up as if some divine hand has revived them, not like as a human, like living human, but as a spirit to fight next to them. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that. I can understand in the fog of war that, especially grappling with the impossible, unfathomable emotions that are happening in World War I can imagine this being a comforting belief, or that in, explosions going off, your life is so on the line that it is possible to hallucinate or maybe actually see something. I could totally believe all of that.
I can too. But when you have a massive, huge group of people, it's okay, is there something here?
Is there a phenomenon worth understanding? Probably,
right? Yeah.
Right? And I think we have since understood a lot of that. Or to the other side of that coin, is it something more real? And it's so otherworldly, So is it something that was actually happened, or is it more psychological is kind of what I'm getting at. Now, like I said, by December of 1915, it seemed these claims were getting so intense that none other than the Society of Psychical Research, who we've talked about a few times on this show, they actually compiled a report on the Battle of Mons. They tracked down every written report of the battle, and I want to believe it. I love that move. Everything possible that was on paper that they could track down, they gathered it, and anything that they had on the appearance of St. George, they also took reports on that. However, in all of these reports, they could not find anyone who had witnessed the angels firsthand. All of the accounts, interestingly, seemed to be second or third degree, which I think gives a lot of credence to it being a story of a story taken as truth.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's hard not to see it as that.
I mean, even the nurse is recounting secondhand the two soldiers that saw St. George in person. I'm curious how they were not able to track those two soldiers down, maybe for privacy, but I'm genuinely shocked that not one single trustworthy source was able to say, I saw it. No one says I. No first degree out here.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to mean something, right?
I think so. I think so.
It's got to mean something at that point.
Because nowadays, for sure, someone's going, I saw it. I saw the heavens opened up. And my old uncle, Huck Johnson, he came down. And my teacher from 5th grade, she said, you forgot your assignment. And
She always said she'd be there in my time of need.
She always said she'd come back in my time of need, but wouldn't help because I didn't turn my essay in. Yeah, I don't. And then you go, oh, okay. They immediately close their notebook with no words written down. Nope. And they go, well, we'll see you next week. Bye.
Yep. Okay. Goodbye now.
Okay. So I think most of us might be able to agree that the story inspired the lore. There's a lot of reasons for that. But also, I think let's take a little closer look. Let's not just leave it there. Let's talk about the theories behind why. Of course, we're going to end with the idea of this maybe being real. So believers, stay tuned. We'll talk about all of it. But the first idea I want to talk about is propaganda. So during this time, and even now, propaganda is widely used, yes, to control and do all the sinister negative tinge stuff, but sometimes also used to boost morale amongst the soldiers and those waiting for them back home. Some theorize that the legend of the Angels of Mons which the public regarded as amazing and inspiring, might have been propaganda to raise spirits for everyone back home. The press was starved for stories from the front line. It was rare that they would get somebody who was able to be on the front line to make it all the way back home to convey that information, so that way families and loved ones back home kind of understand what's happening, right? So there's a real thirst for knowledge. And honestly, it's a totally different topic, but it does remind me of our recent Fan Death Urban Legend episode, where whether it was concocted by the government or not, it might have been a serendipitous story or rumor that the government taps into. So in the Fan Death case, the South Korean government might have leapt on that and used something that they didn't create to help with the conservation of energy during the energy crisis of the 70s. right? We talked about
Yeah,
that.
we did.
So maybe this guy wrote a story, people resonated with it, and the government kind of just coaxed it along because, hey, this seems, even though we know it's fake, let's coax it along because it seems to be inspiring the people.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I could see that, right? I mean, people tell these stories to get people inspired and to, even if it's not this wild, it's still, you look to your generals and your higher ups and you're just like, tell me something before I go and put my life on the line. Like, get me juiced up. And so
right,
it was just, I mean, of course they're gonna, they might just make up some stuff that's like a little like super wild.
But you might have people, I mean, this is the first battle, their first step into the foray. And so who knows, even if people didn't fully believe it, once they enter the battlefield, it's possible that they go, man, maybe it was real. Let's fight like hell and fight like demons and see if God's at our back, whatever it is. So that isn't to say that, Mackin wrote this because the government said, give us some propaganda. It's saying that maybe, it's possible that the government helped coax it along out of serendipity and coincidental timing because it happened to have those effects. It is also worth mentioning that newspapers, again, they're starved for facts, they're starved for content as people want information, and it seems that newspapers began to mix fiction in with their news on the pages, which of course would often confuse people about what was real. And so maybe when his story gets reported in the newspaper, it is called a newspaper, it immediately caused people to believe it, and that belief became unshakable. Mackin had even written some of these factual reports, which then adds to the confusion, because if his name is next to factual reports and next to this story, you're really just kind of making it like, okay, well, Mackin has been associated with truth and this story, so is the story truth? It gets confusing.
Also, it's like, come on, people, just tell it how it is. Stop adding your herbs and spices to it, man. Right. This is historical moments, and you're just like, all right, let me embellish a bit. So,
right.
My friend John, but John, let me tell you something. John secretly has wings.
John's got wings, and he's 8'2".
Yeah, and it's like, stop. Like, right. It doesn't. The story itself is riveting enough. Not like,
right. And it's like lying for a good cause. You're like, it's like lying to a toddler, just to make sure that the right thing happens and unfolds. But is it a morally gray thing to do? 100%. Can people come in and lie intentionally under the guise of that? Oh yeah. But I'm with you. I'm like, just have a thinner newspaper, guys. We don't need to cram it full of story. Be honest. I mean, you know what? Maybe that's terrifying. There's a note. This is why I'm not a government, okay? I'm losing it. My ADD's kicking off. But here's the thing. You can't win. You say, guys, sorry, we don't know from the battlefield. We're being honest with you. Everyone's terrified. You lie a little bit. You tell them it's good. You give them the herbs and spices. Then they start believing in angels coming down. And I guess it's not too bad. You can't win.
No, you can't.
Okay, let me get myself back on track. There is no evidence that Mackin was employed or persuaded by the government to write about St. George. There are reports of others doing so, but not with Mackin. Specifically, British Brigadier General John Charteris was known for engaging in propaganda. On September 5th, 1914, the general allegedly submitted a postcard saying something strange had happened at the Battle of Mons. Now, this preceded Mackin's story, and it would have been the first evidence to support this tale. However, again, there's no evidence of this postcard being written, and Charteris only wrote about this years after the battle went down in his biography. So, again, the only thing that could possibly be like, oh, here's the nugget, the kernel of truth about St. George being there, because it's before the story, is kind of like, there's no evidence for it.
Yeah, there's none.
So, that feels very compelling, very strong. It fits with the psychology of the time, the author's honest candor from the very beginning, and also with the story matching up with eyewitness testimony. And the fact, man, I gotta tell you, Smoking Gun, no first degree admissions. No one.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Like, it's a whole battle, and there's none at all. Like, that's the most telling thing right there.
Right.
Not one.
No one person said, like, listen, I don't know what I saw, but I saw something. Like, not even that's happening. This leads us to the next theory, though, the idea of exhaustion. I was kind of tapping into this earlier, but some believe that perhaps the soldiers on the battlefield that day did see something. Again, doesn't have to be St. George. It could be anything that they couldn't properly explain, but maybe what they saw was not what it appeared to be. Maybe it was confusion, what have you. There's a lot going on. So those who fought in the Battle of Mons admitted that the conditions were extreme. I mean, again, you're at the Black Gate of Mordor, the doors open, insurmountable odds. It's not dissimilar. While retreating, they're obviously still highly outmanned and outgunned. This led them to going into this battle with, they had severe exhaustion. They had little food, little sleep for several days in a row, and soldiers have admitted to hallucinating during times due to conditions like this. And I don't know battlefield psychology at all, but I can imagine if you see friends, colleagues, people you trained with for years go down, you see the army ahead of you, you're underfed, you're underslept, you're running on pure adrenaline and cortisol. I can't imagine what the brain does in that moment.
No, not at all. And you're talking about like, was it 80,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Man, that is just a bunch of variables is what that is.
Right.
Different
You're totally right.
Mental histories, different health histories. Can't imagine. You're right. It's a thing to be studied for sure.
You have 80,000 unique sets of brain chemistry happening in an unprecedented environment. And we've seen through many, many, many episodes that sometimes, whether it be a paranormal event, something unnatural, something unexplainable, sometimes that event itself becomes contagious. Not just people sharing the story, but people experiencing the story, whatever it is. So yeah, soldiers have admitted to hallucinating during such extreme times. Thus, some have theorized that the appearance of St. George and his archers was conjured up by the exhausted minds of the men at war. And, we're talking about Mackin. Does that diffuse everything? There's a sliver that it doesn't, right? Mackin admitted that a lot of the actual elements of the battle that ended up in his story were kind of just coincidence. There's a possibility, right, with millions of writers around the world at any given time that maybe he did stumble into tapping into something that happened. Maybe they did have a group of people that hallucinated something and it correlated with this kind of technical success as they retreated. And he happened to tap into that and give form to it, He gave a name and a face to it. Otherwise, it was just like an energy. And maybe just happened to get that part right. I don't know. But also, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, this is a time where spiritualism is greatly on the rise. Throughout the 1800s, the end of the Victorian era, into where we are now, the idea that the dead can communicate with the living has enraptured people. This is the principal paranormal element of this time. And it's where you get ghost images, you get ghost stories, you get seances, you get people wanting to commune with the other side. And it's not to the point of poltergeist and possessions yet.
No.
But it's that something can be, the spirit goes on.
Right. You want to believe that you didn't truly lose your loved one, and there's masses feeling the same way. So many religions capture this. That's why I say spiritualism in general capturing this idea. Now, in a time of such insurmountable loss, people, kind of needed ideologies that could potentially ease that grief. Answers help more than the great unknown when you're grieving for a lost loved one at this scale is tremendous. Now, while it doesn't explain what happened on the battlefield that day, it could explain the reach that the story had, despite continuously being proven false. The constant admission that this was fictional, it could be the fuel behind why it escaped, right? It had escape velocity in the public's eye. And to kind of close out this thought, it's basically been suggested that this story was more widely believed and received well because of this spiritualism movement. I think everybody in some way has a bit of spiritualism to them, at least a theory as to what happens on the other side. Oh, yeah.
Even if you're an atheist and you're like, nah, nothing. I don't know. It's all very interesting. We all love the unknown. That's why we're here.
Right. That's a whole, man, you can discuss that for the rest of your life. All the different theories and variables of that.
The greatest unsolved mystery of all time, perhaps. The last theory, as I also mentioned, kind of dropped nuggets along the way. Did St. George appear? It's very possible, albeit slim. Do I want something like that to happen? You bet your bottom dollar.
Yeah.
Do I believe it? I don't know. That is the final theory, the final notion here.
I mean, again, we want to believe, right? But we can't just openly believe what's being said. Especially, I mean, this one, the big thing is just no firsthand witnesses, or I mean, like, you're talking about tens of thousands of people. I'll even take like relatives that was like, yeah, you know, my father talked about this all the time or whatever. It's none of that was there. And they did do thorough investigating, you know, we said they tracked down all the notes, they said, you know what I mean? Which sounds,
any reports they could find.
And reports they can find sounds just like a huge task all in itself. That's a rough one right there. But to think of, you know, I mean, again, we watch this in media, you know, we're referencing Lord of the Rings and, you know, a bit of a 300 vibe here, these insurmountable odds, and then supernatural come in and help fight. It's just a story you want to believe in.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's why I think my brain kind of lands into that propaganda territory, the energizing, motivational oomph of the story. But with the story in mind, some people needed to square the circle hole. You know, how do you square the peg here when, okay, fine, let's talk about St. George actually being there. What was going on with the story then? Was it just very strange coincidence, or was it something else? So the theory goes on to say that, you know, if St. George was there, it has been argued that Mackin penned the story via telepathy, unknowingly seeing what was actively happening in the battlefield. Maybe he was chosen as to have the spark of truth so he could then write it and share it with the world as to what happened that day. So people are arguing that essentially the elements of accuracy weren't just coincidence, but rather proof that the more fantastic parts of the story must also be true. And a sliver of me wants to believe that. But, you know, a lot of my beliefs are built on that tangible, hard evidence.
Yeah, I need that tangible, hard stuff.
You know what? I'd be really curious what we'll really be telling about the idea of propaganda, or it just being in the British environment and taking off there, would be, what do the Germans have to say about it? Did St. George come down and start striking them with a bunch of bowmen? Like, what's their style of story on this battle?
Right.
Did they have no tails?
Hold on now. We didn't have any. You got a whole massive army on the other side. Were there, I didn't think about that. Where are their accounts, right?
Right.
We talked about the bodies and stuff and if there was evidence, but what are the Germans account of? Like, you know, no one on the German side was like, we saw the supernatural rise from the grave and start to fight for the other side. Like, where's all that? Where are those accounts?
It looks like, and this is a cursory glance because I didn't think about this when researching until just now, so it's not an exhaustive answer, but it seemed that some individuals from the German Empire had stories related to the Battle of Mons. These mostly come from prisoners of war or through various reports that reflect the British legend of the Angels of Mons. I'm kind of talking as I scan here, but Germans sometimes just reporting exhaustion or strange lights. So they don't have the same level of embellishments, but I mean, that's kind of interesting. You know, prisoners of war, there's some coaxing that could be in play there. One, you know, if you're trying to avoid, I don't know, harm, death, or whatever, you might just kind of be agreeable. And two, you're surrounded by the British, you might pick up these stories. So there's something to be said about the POW testimonials, seeing strange things or experiencing delays that match the so-called Angels narrative. But otherwise, it does seem that most of the official reports don't kind of center themselves around the Angels story, that the German Empire military was mostly focused on the British fighting very well to kind of overcome the strategic odds. So yeah, I'd say take that with a huge grain of salt. I'm kind of scanning as I read there. So there's some elements there which I find fascinating, but not enough for me to go, oh, cool. It couldn't be decisive. It couldn't be not a single German said anything about it.
Right.
Or every German saw it too.
I know.
Like, it's right in the middle, you know? Despite this widely held belief that the legend was true, there is little to no written confirmed reports from soldiers or anybody else firsthand seeing St. George or his bowmen during the Battle of Mons. I also want to stop and reflect, when we put this on the docket, maybe I already said this, but Christian kind of pitched this story to me and I found it so fascinating. I thought it would be, you know, a ghost or an alien or some sort of interesting paranormal angle like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of shocked both of us to find, as Kat was doing the research here, that, oh no, there is an origin. So I love that it's become the discussion of how did this stick and why did it take off and whatnot. And since this story took off, Mackin has become the biggest debunker of his own story. I find that so funny, like ironic.
Yeah, which is so funny. He's like, guys, this was made up. It's not real. And I was like, no, I was there. I saw it.
Yeah, you can't take it back now. I know the truth, Mackin. But it doesn't matter. You know, it doesn't matter to a country that's grieving, fighting, straining for hope.
Yeah, that's the difference.
And so, if nothing else, it is another interesting story. It doesn't leave it open-ended to oohs and ahs of what could be. Not so much, anyway. But I think it leaves you open to, once again, understanding the underbelly, the mechanics that make a ghost story or an alien encounter or anything paranormal kind of tick. It's the same with the Appalachian stories. I love them so deeply. We haven't covered too many because a lot of them are word of mouth or not super, super deep. But this gives us a glimpse into the mechanics of the unknown and why things intrigue us and why they take off. And for that, I find it even more fascinating than the original story.
I agree.
But thus ends our discussion on the Angels of Mons.
That's a unique one. I haven't had that one.
Yeah, dude. And this also feels like a movie.
Yeah, it does.
I'd call it the King of the Crowns.
The King of the Crowns.
I don't know where I went with that. But yeah, any final thoughts as we come to a close here? Like I said, it was a very unique structure, not so much on the unknown. I feel like depending on where you're at, Task Force, as a believer or skeptic, you might find some cracks to look through and be like, well, maybe. But how are you feeling, Fredo? Where do you land on all this?
I think, you know, a lot of people just wanted to believe a grand story, you know, to help them grieve in some way, shape, or form. It's, you know, a time of war, so emotions are high and feelings are rampant. And so I believe that's what happened here. This episode alone has been very interesting because when have we had a spectral army, you know?
Yeah, dude.
So that's
wild.
unique. And, you know, what, 250 plus episodes in, we're pulling something like this out, and I'm like, oh, yeah. I've never heard about that. What the heck?
Yeah.
That just goes to show that there's so much out there. There's all these stories and events, whether true or false or anywhere in between. There's so much to like listen and learn about.
I really like the discussion of the propaganda angle because while obviously that's where my inclination leans, it's the psychology of underneath it all. You know, I've always grown up with propaganda having such a negative tinge, and it is. You know, there is something sinister about the idea of propaganda, and a lot of it can be used for sinister things and control. But beyond that, though, I'm fascinated by the kindling of spirit. You know, you want to believe when you go into a battle of this caliber that what you're doing is righteous. And that goes for all battles for all time. All sides always feel like they're righteous. And so to know, you know, to have a story anyway of St. George coming down emboldens you and heartens you as a soldier, perhaps. And so that, I think it's really fascinating to kind of take a glimpse back at this story, but also, you know, the psychology of it all, you know, for lack of a better term, just the thinking. But yeah, a really fascinating tale to be sure. And whether it directly or not inspired Tolkien, it's definitely one of those stories that inspires.
No, definitely. It's
yeah.
the stories that like people will pull from or even make a movie about. So yeah,
absolutely.
Very grand tale.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all, Task Force, so much for listening to yet another wonderful episode and discussion. We look forward to seeing your theories, your discussion over on our Patreon exclusive Discord channel, which if you want to know how to get access to that, head over to redwebpod.com. We have a post for it. You can search for it, or Patreon will guide you through it too in the FAQ area. But I also want to give some shout outs. We have Thomas, who is our newest member of the Task Force Elite. Thank you very much for signing up. Our buff scientist of the week is Patrick Perlmutter. And then, of course, our squonks trying not to melt here in the freezing temperatures. Brett O'Meara, G, Zarathustra, and Jordan Chase. Thank you all so much. In addition to all the people scrolling over us right now for supporting us directly. It is the #1 way to support the show outside of listening and sharing. Review us if you want. Share us with your mom, dude. Moms love us.
Moms love us. We love moms.
We love moms. I've been thinking about mom merch for, I don't know when Mother's Day.
Valentine's Day, dude.
For Valentine's Day. Just trying to get way ahead of things.
Moms love true crime.
Mom's heart true crime is definitely on the mind. I think all moms love a little true crime. Yeah. But it's hard to it gets a little hairy when you start to say "We heart moms." You don't want to put that sticker on the back window, but yeah, be on the lookout for that. Mother's Day is not for another several months, so we'll cook away, tinkering away in the lab. But moms out there, it's for you. If there's something you want to see out of store.redwebpod.com, let us know. Otherwise, this has been a fantastic discussion, Fredo. I really appreciate exploring all these with you as we do every single week. But with that said, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.